So many people have requested a collaboration with Whitney Webb. Her series went viral last year, much more about Epstein than the shallow headlines that we've been seeing in the news. I mean, Whitney has gone deep into the history of intelligence agencies, honey traps, all of the various ties from the Clinton family to her latest work about Bloomberg. So before we get into the questions here, Whitney, thanks for coming on. And could you just tell the people watching this who you are and how you came into the Epstein case, please?
All right, so my name is Whitney Webb. I have been writing with Mint Press News for about 3 years, and that is where this series ended up being published. I got into writing about the Epstein scandal quite by accident. I only really had decided to investigate it for myself when it came out that Epstein had been, or Alex Acosta, who used to work in the Trump administration, when he was being interviewed by the Trump transition team, stated that his reason for, signing off on Epstein's sweetheart deal in 2008 was because Epstein had belonged to intelligence. So when that came out, I was really interested in seeing if I could find out, what intelligence agency that was, and the nature of how that relationship began and things like that. And what I found is that this is something that did not really start with Epstein. It goes much farther back. And there's a lot of, ties between Epstein to previous sexual blackmail operations that really date back, going back to the Prohibition era, because this is a tactic that was really perfected in the U.S. by the American Mafia, who later got in bed with intelligence. And that nexus is essentially what gave rise to Jeffrey Epstein, which is, probably like the shortest summary I can give of the whole series I did, which was a 4-part series with a couple spin-offs.
Well, there's so many questions, and people have watched all of the various videos that I've put up over the months as well. And just looking at stuff that would be the most novel, I think, for my viewers, I just read what you've put up about Bloomberg. Shall we start with the relationship between Bloomberg and Epstein and his associates?
Sure, if you'd like. That is my most recent Epstein-related article, and I think it's really relevant because Michael Bloomberg, of course, is seeking the presidency now as part of the Democratic Party. And oddly enough, even though he has, pictures with Ghislaine Maxwell, he was in Epstein's book of contacts, where Epstein had at least 5 different numbers and a couple addresses for Bloomberg. There has been no questioning of Bloomberg on those ties, which I think is really troubling, and a very damning indictment of mainstream media, especially because, when the Epstein scandal first broke, there was lots of, even in the mainstream and alternative media as well, speculation about his ties to the Clintons, his ties to Trump, and really anyone that was seen as having very close ties with Epstein, they automatically almost became radioactive, as it were. And, several months after, not that long after the fact, Epstein was arrested in July. Bloomberg announced his candidacy in November of last year. There has been no interest, apparently, in American mainstream media in asking Bloomberg about those ties. And oddly enough, in rival campaigns for the presidency in the U.S. that have sought to throw shade on Bloomberg and criticize him for various things, they have also declined to pursue this, which I think is quite troubling. Another of those ties that I think is also significant would be Bloomberg's ties to Leslie Wexner, who of course was, a very close associate and, the source of a large amount, if not the majority, of Epstein's so-called fortune. Bloomberg was known to have socialized and attended parties at Wexner's homes on more than one occasion. Of course, we know from Epstein accusers that Wexner's homes on occasion were used by Epstein in for his nefarious ends. And of course, there's been no interest in that. And also, Wexner was one of these figures that was pressured in the wake of the Epstein scandal to recuse himself from public life, not unlike what happened to Prince Andrew and some other close Epstein associates. And that is why Wexner was pushing really to sell and leave his position as CEO of his company, The Limited or Limited Brands. And it was actually a Bloomberg-backed private equity firm that took over that company recently. Sycamore Partners bought the controlling stake from Wexner, allowing him to step out of his role in the company with a hefty payout. I forget the exact sum, but that firm has over $100 million of Bloomberg's money in it. So I think that connection was also glossed over, and that's why Bloomberg, is attending Democratic debates and very much a relevant figure in U.S. politics, but he hasn't been questioned on these ties at all, which I think is really significant. And I also, in the article, go over a couple of other ties that Bloomberg has to people that were also connected to Jeffrey Epstein in various forms, including Mort Zuckerman, who's a media executive who bought, for example, the New York Daily News after Robert Maxwell's death. Maxwell was the previous owner and also had close ties with Jeffrey Epstein, was a former, I believe, business partner of his, and also attended dinners at his home and is a longtime supporter and backer of Michael Bloomberg, who, not unlike Mort Zuckerman, is also a New York media executive.
Okay, so you've raised so many questions there. I'd just like to start out by saying that the toxicity continues on this side of the pond. They're trying to kick out the boss of Barclays Bank right now over here. And also in my lifetime, I've never, ever seen the career of a member of the royal family melt down like has happened to Prince Andrew, and deservedly so. So in the eyes of the public, the tabloids, there is a trafficking conspiracy that has Epstein at the top, and then Ghislaine Maxwell, Jean-Luc Brunel, etc. But you've said that what Epstein was doing was part of a much bigger picture of intelligence agency honey traps, which have been going on for decades. So in the grand conspiracy then, bigger than the tabloid conspiracy, where does Wexner fit into that? Was he above Epstein?
Oh, yeah, I definitely think so. I think Epstein was really more of a front man for interests that Wexner is closely associated with and represents. But going back into the history, I'm trying to think of where the best place to start with Wexner. But basically, we know that Wexner had ties with organized crime as early as the early 1980s. His relationship with Epstein, it's not exactly clear when it began, because both Wexner and Epstein, when they were asked about the date that they met, over the years, both gave different responses, each one of them saying, depending on who was interviewing them, would give a different year at any given time. So the range goes from 1985 to 1989, with 1987 also being thrown out there. So it's not exactly clear when they met exactly, but it appears, my guess would be that it was 1985 based on my research and some of the sources that I've cited in my series and subsequent articles. And this is because in 1985, Leslie Wexner was implicated in the murder of his lawyer, Arthur Shapiro, and a police report from that time period directly linked Leslie Wexner to organized crime interests, specifically the Genovese crime family, which is one of the main factions of the National Crime Syndicate, to which numerous other families in the so-called mega group that I talk about in my series that Wexner co-founded with Charles Bronfman. They all have ties to the same national crime syndicate, either through their families or through their own business relations. So Wexner is one of those individuals, having co-founded the mega group. But before then, with Epstein, he and Epstein together were involved in a lot of shady real estate deals in New York. This was also at the time when Epstein had met and begun to associate publicly with other figures in the New York real estate circle, I guess you could say. This includes Donald Trump. This includes Tom Barrack of Colony Capital, who continues to be a close associate of Trump. And going forward, by the time the 90s had really begun, Wexner and Epstein were incredibly close. Epstein exercised incredible amount of control over Wexner's finances, had power of attorney, had the right to hire and fire people at Wexner's enterprises. And it was at that point that Wexner and Epstein together oversaw the relocation of the CIA front company, Southern Air Transport, that was involved in the Iran-Contra scandal, from its previous base in Miami, Florida, to Columbus, Ohio, presumably to run cargo for the Limited, which at the time was the nation's largest retailer. But of course, there were figures in Ohio's government that speculated that Epstein and Wexner, because this was well known to the public actually to be a CIA front company because of reporting on the Iran-Contra scandal. These officials speculated and had apparently strong reason to believe that Epstein and Wexner were both working with the CIA in some capacity and were smuggling for interests that were related to both the CIA and organized crime, leading Ohio's Inspector General at the time to refer to that cargo run for the Limited that Southern Air Transport relocated to do. He referred to that as the Meyer Lansky run, a reference to the famous Jewish American mobster who was really the head of the national crime syndicate that I just mentioned. So this national crime syndicate has close ties both to U.S. intelligence and Israeli intelligence, and is sort of, I would call, like a transnational crime syndicate. And I think, honestly, that Epstein, even though he had ties to both intelligence agencies, was really working more for them because they have transnational interests that at times jive better with perhaps Israel's current government than the U.S.'s current government. But they, billionaires that are behind this group, have their own agenda, and occasionally the governments to which they're closely tied will deviate from that, at which point someone like Epstein could use blackmail to keep them in line with the so-called mega group's agenda. So that's my personal take on it, though it has been substantial evidence has grown since I last come out, since I finished publishing my series in August, that the sexual blackmail operation in particular was most closely tied to Israeli military intelligence. This comes from a couple sources, including most recently a person who most recently came out and said this was Steve Hoffenberg, who was Epstein's former business partner at Tower Financial, which was this huge Ponzi scheme, basically, that they together started in 1987. It collapsed in 1993. Only Hoffenberg was charged, even though Epstein was the architect of the scheme, because his name was later dropped from the case, not unlike what happened with his sweetheart deal. So, he clearly had friends in high places way back then. The sexual blackmail operation is believed to have begun around 1993 and 1995. But well before then, as I just sort of laid out, there were ties to intelligence that were ongoing. And even during the night, later on in his life, Epstein would claim that during the 1980s that he worked directly with the CIA. He had ties to people, or was working on behalf of people like Adnan Khashoggi, the infamous Saudi arms dealer who had ties to both Saudi, U.S., and Israeli intelligence. So I think Epstein honestly was more of sort of like a mercenary, I guess you could say, in the world of intelligence, doing things like sexual blackmail, financial crimes, and things of that nature, and was really, I guess, a front man for this sort of mafia type enterprise, the mega group that hides behind this mask of philanthropy. They call themselves philanthropists, but they all have deep ties to organized crime.
Like Ghislaine Maxwell, we're going to have young people save the oceans. So
yeah.
You've mentioned about Southern Air Transport. So I wrote a book on Barry Seal, and he was flying loads in of cocaine into America for the CIA, weapons out, financing the war, going down to Nicaragua. And through that research, it brought me to the Clinton crime family, and I learned there's a place where organized crime and the intelligence agencies and the political mafia coexist. So It seems that we've been on separate journeys, but we've reached the same destination. You've mentioned the mega group several times. For people who are not familiar with all this terminology, could you just expand on what the mega group is?
The mega group is this group of so-called philanthropist billionaires which was founded by Leslie Wexner and Charles Bronfman in 1991. It has its membership roster isn't public, but there was a Wall Street Journal article that was the first public reveal, I guess you could say, of the group's existence. This was published, I believe, in either 1998 or 1999, and the group was founded in 1991, and they were referred to as the Mega Group, or the Study Group. They had a couple different nicknames, but I guess Mega Group is the name that stuck because they're these so-called mega billionaires. And what these guys all have in common is that they, are nominally American, but they also all have an extreme zealous support for the state of Israel. And nearly all of them have direct ties to organized crime, either through their families or, by virtue of their actions and business interests. I mentioned Leslie Wexner a little bit being named by Ohio's police as an affiliate to the National Crime Syndicate. The Bronfman family has its ties to the National Crime Syndicate going back to when that crime syndicate was founded. Actually, it predates the founding of that crime syndicate anyway, the Bronfman family's ties. It goes back to Canadian, the Prohibition era in Canada, which preceded the U.S.'s own Prohibition. You have other figures like Michael Steinhardt, who is also very close to Michael Bloomberg, who we were just talking about. And Michael Steinhardt's father was actually Mayor Lansky's jewel fence and was a major player in the New York criminal underworld and was actually the person that jump-started his son's Wall Street career. Michael Steinhardt is a well-known hedge fund manager and has recently made headlines because of the numerous amount of women accusing him of sexual harassment and very deplorable behavior. Another figure that's tied to organized crime would be Max Fisher, who is not alive anymore, but used to be a major political operative and advisor to Henry Kissinger and Nixon, and who was also, I believe, the founder of the Republican Jewish Coalition, which is basically one of the main funding sources for neoconservative political candidates. Today, it's dominated by Sheldon Adelson and Paul Singer, but it used to be, Leslie Wexner used to be a major player there as well as some other members of the mega group. Max Fisher used to associate with the Detroit Purple Gang, which was another sort of a faction of the National Crime Syndicate, a Jewish American mob based in the area where he grew up in Detroit, Michigan. And there's several more. Steven Spielberg, even, for example, who's part of this mega group, he's a protege of Lou Wasserman, who was a protege himself of Mo Dalitz, who is this well-known Jewish American mobster based in Ohio, who was named by the FBI and the precursor to the DEA of being basically second in command or, a number 2 type ranking figure in Mayor Lansky's criminal empire, which really is the National Crime Syndicate. The National Crime Syndicate, which I've mentioned a lot, that was founded sort of by Charles Luciano and Mayor Lansky in the 1920s and sort of brought the Jewish mob and American mob together. But at a certain point during World War II, when that syndicate first got in bed with U.S. intelligence, Luciano was deported to Italy, and basically Lansky took over the whole operation and basically dominated it. So Lansky is a really key figure in how this developed. And of course, these figures themselves were very involved in sexual blackmail operations, well preceding their union with U.S. intelligence, and they actually helped the CIA, or the precursor to the CIA, the OSS, blackmail the longtime director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, among numerous other politicians and military officials. But I didn't want to get too far off of that. But basically, the mega group is sort of an outgrowth of that same syndicate that has longstanding ties to U.S. and Israeli intelligence, but they're also major political donors. As I mentioned, the Republican Jewish Coalition, they're major political donors, not just in the U.S., but also in the state of Israel. A lot of members of the mega group, including Ronald Lauder, who's a close friend of Trump and was also a close friend of his mentor, Roy Cohn, he was one of the main backers of the Likud party and oversaw Netanyahu's first victorious campaign as a prime minister of Israel in 1996, and was largely credited with that campaign being successful, which was really, Netanyahu was the underdog there, and Lauder, through his large financial backing of that campaign and also connecting him with Arthur Finkelstein, this Republican political operative in the U.S. who's quite controversial. That was basically credited with Netanyahu winning that campaign. So he is very, they have close ties to both governments and both intelligence agencies. And that's sort of where, the more you look at this group, that starts to really seem like the center point of this whole web in which, Epstein was that Epstein was a part of.
So a lot of people were baffled when it came out that Epstein was courting all these heads of technology. And reading what you've been researching and writing about, the power is in tech, and the intelligence agencies are permeating themselves in the fields of tech to get that power. You mentioned on a recent article about Twitter and how, in particular, Israel is putting people in these positions in these technology companies to get that information and get that power. Could you expand on that, please?
Yeah, sure. So this is something that both U.S. and Israeli intelligence had been doing for several decades. A good place to start, I guess, would be the 1980s with the Promise software scandal, which involved both U.S. and Israeli intelligence, the installing of a backdoor into this software that was stolen from the company that created it, and then was basically marketed all over the world by people, including Robert Maxwell. And then that allowed both the U.S. and Israeli intelligence through separate backdoors to have access to all the databases where that software was installed. Promise was just the first of many such companies that have been doing that for a very long time. There was recently an expose, I believe, published in the Washington Post about how a cryptography company based in Switzerland that was very widely used and respected was actually secretly owned by the CIA, and that a lot of, that same software had a trapdoor, not unlike what had taken place several years prior with the Promise software. But increasingly, even though both U.S. and Israel in the past, like in Promise, had collaborated to do that type of activity, there are also situations where Israel has done, Israeli intelligence has basically used that same approach, but in targeting the U.S. rather aggressively. Leaked NSA documents have revealed that the NSA considered Israel to be the third most aggressive spy agency targeting the U.S. behind Russia and China. That would put Israel ahead of countries like Iran and North Korea, which is quite significant. So anyway, after September 11th, there were a series of reports in Fox News by Carl Cameron, who basically revealed that there were several companies, Israeli companies, software companies and tech companies and telecommunications companies that were very involved in basically providing backdoors to sensitive U.S. communications to Israel's government. And we also know that one of those companies, Amdocs, was involved in basically the wiretapping of the White House, which is how Netanyahu acquired tapes of Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky basically having phone sex and attempted to use that as leverage over Clinton. And that apparently was a factor in Clinton deciding to pardon Mark Rich, who is the founder of Glencore and was a fugitive for a very long time and controversially pardoned in Clinton's last days in office. So this same operation, there's Promise and there's all this going on in the 90s up until after 9/11. In the post 9/11 era, this really, I would say, exploded because in the era of post 9/11 America, there's been a push to sort of digitize counterterrorism efforts. A lot of the software used for that have had ties to the Maxwell family, including one that was used by the FBI and several other agencies after 9/11. And, this continues up until today. There's a company that I wrote about recently called Cyber Reason that is basically run by the former head of offensive nation-state hacking operations for Israeli military intelligence, who views his work at Cyber Reason, he says himself, as a continuation of his work at Israeli military intelligence. And they have been installed, their software has been installed. It's an antivirus software. It's basically been installed on networks for the DISA, the CIA, and the NSA, and several other sensitive networks for the U.S. Army and the U.S. Navy. Technology experts quoted in numerous articles have noted that antivirus specifically gets access to endpoints of the entire system, not just the computer itself, but the networks it's connected to, in order to protect the software, and is the quote unquote ultimate backdoor, as one of them said, into these networks. So this type of stuff continues. A lot of it is pushed through really actively by the Israel lobby, which includes organizations funded by these mega group donors, and also other lobby groups. And it has really been to the benefit of the state of Israel, all of that. And it's Epstein even was involved in one of these companies. He was funding one called Carbine 911, which is basically an Israeli military intelligence linked company that gets installed in all the emergency call software, or like the infrastructure for 911 emergency calls in the United States. And then what that software does is that when you call 911 from your phone, it gets access to literally everything on your phone, and then stores it, and then uses algorithms to predict your future behavior and future crime and pre-crime and like all this other very Orwellian stuff. And of course, this company, not only did Epstein invest in it, Peter Thiel of PayPal and Palantir fame, who's very close to the Trump administration, also has ties to Israel, also invested in that. And the chairman of the board and one of the other main investors is Ehud Barak, who we knew had very close ties to Jeffrey Epstein, is not just the former prime minister of Israel, but the former head of Israeli military intelligence at the time that Epstein was allegedly recruited to work for them in the 1980s. So that's pretty significant. He was a frequent visitor not only to Epstein's Island, but also spent the night at apartments where Epstein kept a lot of his, sex slaves, basically, that was owned by Epstein's brother, Mark Epstein. And Ehud Barak has somehow evaded, not unlike many other figures connected to this scandal, a lot of political scrutiny. He sort of got some mud thrown at him by Netanyahu when he tried to run in a recent Israeli election, and then he sort of stepped back and decided not to run. But beyond that, there hasn't been any push for accountability from Ehud Barak. And this company that I just mentioned that was funded by people like Epstein directly and, backed by Ehud Barak, who's chairman of its board, they're still installed on the 911 software in several counties in the U.S. with plans to expand. So, that's where that is at this current point in time. The fact that Epstein would be interested in backing something like this is significant, but it's part of a broader policy push by Israel's government and some of these, mega group linked or mega, other pro-Israel billionaires in the U.S. to basically outsource or make U.S. tech dependent on Israeli tech with the ostensible purpose of preventing boycotts of Israel at any point in the future, which has sort of been a push of the Israel lobby within the United States, where you can't even criticize Israel in U.S. universities or at public institutions or things of that nature due to legislation that's gone forward. And I think that that broader push is part of why we see someone like Epstein, after his sexual blackmail operation was exposed after his first arrest and really fell apart, begin to cultivate really close ties with the tech industry, cultivating ties with people like Elon Musk of Tesla, and appearing at dinners with people like Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn, meeting with people like Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, and really trying to rebrand himself before his most recent arrest as a tech investor. A lot of those interviews where he was trying to promote himself as such ended up not being published after his arrest, but there were several outlets that came out and said later that they'd interviewed Epstein from that perspective of sort of painting him as this investor in tech, in the technology, U.S. technology sector.
So you've raised Bill Clinton's name, and a lot of people have asked, where did Epstein's money come from? You've covered that to an extent. So when I was writing about Barry Seal and researching what happened in Arkansas, Larry Nichols, who worked for the Clintons under ADFA, he said, that was set up supposedly to boost jobs in the economy, but actually almost $100 million worth of money from these arms for drugs transactions was getting laundered through ADFA every month. And the way they did it was you could get a loan from ADFA that you never had to pay back. To get that loan, you paid the Rose Law Firm so much money,
right,
and then the loan got approved. So there's this mind-boggling amount of money in circulation because of these deals that the intelligence agencies are running. Do you think that some of Epstein's money came from that, or he was laundering proceeds from such deals?
Yeah, I definitely think he was super involved in money laundering, and I think if you look at Epstein's history, he left Bear Stearns in 1981. I think he had ties to BCCI, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, which was very involved with the Iran-Contra scandal, because we know that some of Epstein's clients during that time, like Adnan Khashoggi, relied heavily on that bank, and that bank was heavily connected to intelligence at a time when Epstein claimed at one point that he was working for intelligence. So I think there are definitely connections there. As to the laundry that the Clintons set up in Arkansas while Bill Clinton was governor, I don't know if Epstein had direct ties to that one in particular, but I mean, that was just one of many money laundering operations that were being supervised and run at the behest of the CIA during that period of time. But I think Epstein, because during the 1980s, was not really in the U.S. that much. He spent a lot of time in London and traveling around, as evidenced by this mysterious Austrian passport that sort of came to light after his recent arrest. He was, going all over the world, but not so. It appeared that he wasn't spending any amount of time or long periods of time in the U.S. specifically. I also think it's interesting too, which hasn't really gotten enough coverage, in my opinion, in terms of the BCCI scandal, that BCCI was also involved in the sex trafficking of minors as an attempt to blackmail and basically bribe officials in different governments to get them to go along with, or rather to not prosecute and look the other way when it came to BCCI's criminal activity, money laundering, among other things. And we know for a fact that this happened because it's in the U.S. Senate report or Senate investigation of BCCI and its activities. So it's pretty much on the record that this happened. And what you mentioned earlier about how you and you went sort of the drug investigation route, and I sort of went the sexual blackmail operation route. This is really, arms trafficking, drug trafficking, the sexual blackmail, and the trafficking of minors. All of this stuff is done by the same group, I guess you could call them, or whatever, this syndicate. They're involved in all of these activities, and they have used all of these activities for years for different purposes, and have gotten away with it because there's been no accountability. They've been doing this, as I mentioned, for decades, almost actually probably like around a century now, and there hasn't been any accountability, and they are just have so much influence and power, it seems like, in a lot of public institutions that normally we would presume would hold these people accountable. But as far as Epstein's money laundering goes, he also laundered a lot of money through New York real estate deals, or shady real estate deals, especially if they are cash-only transactions, are frequently used for money laundering. I think a lot of that, as I mentioned earlier, how Epstein and Wexner were involved in a lot of real estate deals in the 1980s. They were basically flipping all these properties around for cash-only deals to shell companies that they also owned, and all this other shady activity. And at this time, as I mentioned, they were involved. Epstein was, personal friends with people like Trump and Tom Barrack, and people like that, who also have been accused of using their real estate empires for the purpose of money laundering. That's why I think, the Epstein-Trump connections didn't really get as much coverage, perhaps, as the Clinton ones, because the Clinton one, has much more direct ties to the sexual blackmail operation than the Trump one does. But I think that's because, the ties of Trump to Epstein are related more to this sort of criminal activity that has taken place for a long time in the New York real estate market, and also the fact that one of Donald Trump's mentors, Roy Cohn, who I talk about in my series quite a bit, was also very involved in sexual blackmail operations. So if your mentor is someone involved in that, they will tell you how not to be ensnared. And by all indications, we know that Trump knew what Epstein was doing because several years before Epstein was even arrested, Trump talked about how he was always surrounded by women on the, quote, younger side, and things of that nature. And we also had recently the widow of Senator John McCain in the U.S. Go out in public and say, we all knew what Epstein was doing, which I think didn't really get any coverage at all. So, it's pretty much known that this was known to be going on. I dug up a bunch of reports about Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell that were scrubbed from the internet after his first arrest in 2007, but I still found quite a bit of them, and a lot of those also revealed, if you read them, that it was very clear what was going on. I mean, there were reports as early as the 90s about Ghislaine Maxwell taking groups of young teenage girls and training them in sex techniques and things like that. I mean, it's very obvious, if that was even able to make it into mainstream journalism at the time, it's very obvious that this was known to the people and these that ran in these social circles with these individuals.
This level of information that you have, does it worry you at all? I mean, last year I came on.
Worry me in what way?
Well, last year I was doxxed and hacked and everything was upside down for like a month.
Yeah. I had a guy try and harass my father in my hometown where I haven't lived since I left to go to college, and put pictures of him online and threatened to go interview him on his YouTube channel and just a lot of other stuff like that. And I mean, I've gotten some weird messages, but I don't really let it bother me. I mean, I don't live in the United States. I'm not really that worried about a lot of pushback from this, especially because the mainstream media ignores it so much. I mean, a lot of this has, unfortunately, in the months since the scandal really broke, has sort of faded from the public interest. I think the mainstream media is a major factor in that. Not just because they've basically ignored and don't touch the story anymore, but even when they did, I mean, they just focused on the salacious details of the case and sort of sensationalized it and made it, tabloid-esque coverage. Totally ignored the intelligence angle and the government involvement in all of this stuff, and basically treated Ghislaine Maxwell, who was a major co-conspirator in this, an abuser of children, a rapist herself, and all of these, accused of all these other horrible crimes. They treat her as Epstein's poor, sad girlfriend or his gal pal, and I find that really sickening and disgusting. But basically what that does in the public mind is sort of degrade this down to sort of like a tabloid, salacious story, and not what it should be, a huge scandal about the fact that there are governments and intelligence agencies who are using taxpayer money to finance the abuse of children for the purpose of blackmail, which in any other sane world would be a massive story and lead to massive lead to some accountability for those involved. And there's really been nothing except that some people have been forced to retire from public life. Oh, poor them. I don't really have a lot of pity for people like Wexner and Prince Andrew, who no longer feel comfortable showing themselves, showing their faces at public events. I mean, I honestly think they belong in prison for what they did. Prince Andrew.
What do you think about Prince Andrew's 60th birthday party getting cancelled?
Well, I didn't even know it was canceled. But as I was saying, I don't feel bad at all for those people. I honestly, a lot of times when this sort of stuff happens and, a birthday gets canceled, mainstream media will make it sound horrible, but it omit the fact that these people are criminals. So, I don't really have any sympathy at all. Actually, when it comes to Prince Andrew, those scrubbed media reports that I was referencing, most of them were in UK media, and a lot of them had to do with either controversy about Ghislaine Maxwell herself, because her father was very much hated for a rather long period of time in the UK for his embezzlement of, worker pension funds and things like that. So she would get some coverage there. But Prince Andrew as well, there were reports of him going on vacation numerous times in the year 2000 with Maxwell and Epstein, and that he would bring along with him his own personal massage table so he could receive massages from the girls that surrounded Epstein and Maxwell at the time. And this didn't get any mainstream media coverage. They, a lot of them took at face value Prince Andrew's claims that he was innocent. But of course, even though, it came out in the court case itself that massage and massage tables and all of this was, the way they hid these sexual activities. They were codenamed as being massage when really it was, forcing these girls to have sex with these people. And so the fact that he would bring his massage table around and would frequently get massages from people on vacation with, Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein. This was going on numerous vacations that Prince Andrew took with the two of them in the year 2000. Let's remember, too, that Prince Andrew's only accuser that has gone public Virginia, I always butcher her new last name, sorry. But Virginia Roberts is her original name. Anyway, she said that she first encountered Prince Andrew in March of 2001. So the fact that this was going on before then, his involvement in this is much more significant. It's not surprising why more girls want to come forward to accuse Prince Andrew when we know that now that the reason ABC News, which apparently had this story before the scandal broke for a second time at Epstein's second arrest more recently, that was largely killed by pressure from Buckingham Palace and for the royal family itself. And that freaked ABC News out enough to kill the story. So imagine being, a girl that was abused like this, and then you have, no money, no connections, and you have the royal family come after you. It makes sense why there aren't more accusers. Personally, there is definitely a lot of evidence that suggests that Prince Andrew was, abused lots of girls, much more than just Virginia. In this, as part of this operation, and was very involved in it for a very long time. And the fact that, okay, so he's been forced to recuse himself from public life. I mean, I don't really care. I feel sad for anyone that actually does care and sees him as a sympathetic figure in all of this.
So do you think Prince Andrew has become a useful distraction then for bigger players? Because the media in this country on this case, that's all they've been focused on day after day after day, Prince Andrew.
So I think people like Prince Andrew and Bill Clinton were the people, some of the quote-unquote biggest prizes of the blackmail operation that Epstein was running. And I think that the focus on them has allowed attention on who Epstein was working for to evade attention. And I think that is the key there. Not that I want to paint people like Prince Andrew and, people like Bill Clinton as like victims. I certainly don't feel that way. But the fact is they were pretty clearly sort of, entrapped in this. And what I was talking about, those scrub media reports, I mean, there's quotes up there of Epstein saying that Ghislaine Maxwell sort of arranged that relationship between Epstein and Andrew, and that Epstein considered Andrew to be one of his biggest prizes. And this is before any of this about blackmail came out or anything like that. So, I think the focus on them, like I said, keeps attention away from the intelligence agencies that were tied to this. And, to an extent, Wexner has gotten some of the flack as well and been forced to recuse from public life. But, Wexner's connections to the mega group or to politics in the U.S. and Israel or intelligence or organized crime, I mean, none of that was covered. Just, he got money from Epstein or he helped Epstein, get money and stuff like that. But, Wexner, when all this came out last year, claimed that Epstein had actually embezzled a bunch of money from him, but never provided any evidence. And there's actually, it shows the opposite is true, that when Epstein was going to prison the first time, the amount of money that Wexner claimed Epstein embezzled, Epstein had actually transferred to Wexner right before he went to prison. So the evidence suggests the opposite, but mainstream media reported Wexner's claims at face value and didn't even look at the obvious evidence, how the evidence obviously contradicts what he was saying. So it's ridiculous.
So I've just almost finished reading The Assassination of Robert Maxwell, and it's just blown me away that this guy could sit down with Bush, sit down with Gorbachev, while laundering money for criminal organizations from the Russian Mafia to the cartels. He was feeding intelligence to all of the various agencies. And do you think that Maxwell brought Epstein into that world?
Well, that's what I've actually been told. I did an interview with a former member of Israeli military intelligence who worked with Maxwell during the 1980s, and he said that he personally saw Epstein at Maxwell's offices on several occasions, was introduced to Epstein by Maxwell, and that Maxwell said that Epstein had been approved by the higher-ups and was going to start working with them and things of that nature, and that this had been facilitated due to the fact that prior to that, Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell had already started to date. And of course, the official story holds that they didn't meet until 1991. This would obviously contradict that fact, in that Robert Maxwell, saw Epstein as, a potential future like son-in-law or something, and wanted to get them and his daughter sort of set up in the family business of, doing all this shadowy activity on behalf of intelligence.
So Maxwell was riding high for years, Robert Maxwell, and according to this book, because he was in such desperate need for money, he started to put pressure on Israel to come up with almost £500 million, which is $500 million probably at the present translation rate. So when they weren't forthcoming, he started to threaten certain things. So they said, all right, we will be forthcoming. Get on the yacht, get on the Lady Ghislaine. You need to meet these people at this location. And he goes off to the Canary Islands. He's found dead in the water without any clothes on. If he'd had a heart attack, he would have just crumpled and been found dead on the yacht.
With his clothes on, right?
yeah. So nothing makes any sense. So basically,
it doesn't make any sense.
They took him out. Do you think Epstein was taken out by the same people? And for what reasons do you think he was taken out?
So going back to Maxwell first, from what I understand as well, it had to do with the fact that, like you said, Maxwell was running interference and involved with a lot of different intelligence agencies, and that a lot of the money that he had pilfered out of his businesses in the UK had for a long time been going to finance Mossad activity in Europe, and that at some point he had given some of the money that was intended for Mossad or to be paid back to people that had lent money to Mossad or Israeli businessmen linked to Mossad, that he had given that money instead to Mikhail Gorbachev of the Soviet Union, and then was unable to make those payments, and that's sort of where that whole debacle ended up coming from, and he started threatening Israel over money and all of this stuff. But anyway, in terms of Epstein, we were talking about sort of like the media attention too. A lot of it is just focused on his death specifically. And so I think a lot of the focus on his death and like the exact circumstances of it and exactly who was behind it also sort of detracts from the accountability and the media pressure on the people that were behind Epstein and financed his operation, what he was meant to do. In terms of what actually happened to Epstein, if you want to look at it super objectively and just look at the facts, there's we know so little about what actually happened. There's been no camera footage. The FBI investigation has been like just a total farce and like just gone away, basically. They were going to charge the prison guards for a while who were, found like asleep and like forging stuff, and one of them wasn't actually a prison guard and all this stuff. I mean, the whole thing was honestly just like so ridiculous. So like the fact, when you take into consideration the intelligence agency angle, that raises a lot of different possibilities as to what could happen. It's very possible that what happened to Robert Maxwell could have happened to Epstein. Epstein, before he died, was said to have said that he was afraid for his life. He was allegedly willing to cooperate with authorities and naming names and things of that nature. If that's true, I mean, I don't want to necessarily put all of my trust in what Epstein was saying either, because he's obviously not a trustworthy individual. But, it's certainly very possible. Intelligence agencies, when someone, even if they're a longtime agent and a longtime asset, if they become a liability, I mean, just like Robert Maxwell, they get taken out. Though, I don't really want to rule out, other possibilities some people have raised that he may have been whisked away somewhere. I mean, when you get involved with intelligence agencies, I mean, they do all sorts of stuff like that. And I think it would be, I don't really want to underestimate them, that they're capable of that. Apparently they've been hiding Ghislaine Maxwell in Israel and some other intelligence safe houses this entire time, and she hasn't been seen by the public. So, why couldn't they do the same for him? I mean, I don't really want to commit myself to any specific theory. It seems likely, just given the precedent with Robert Maxwell, that he would be killed off. But there's been a lot of speculation about, the coroners involved and claiming, he was dead or he was murdered and all of that, the independent coroner that was hired by Epstein's brother, Mark Epstein, is a very shady individual who was involved in the Kennedy assassination cover-up. and the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination cover-up, which, involved intelligence and governments and all of that stuff. So, I really, it's really hard for me to marry myself to one possibility, but at the same time, I really want to urge people to not focus so much on the circumstances of his death, but on the people who are still with us and who, should be held accountable for their role. This, of course, includes Ghislaine Maxwell. This includes people like Leslie Wexner, who at least are known to the public to be directly associated with this operation, but I think more broadly, the intelligence agencies, because if they were paying someone like Epstein to do this, they were likely paying other people at the time to do the same. Historically, a lot of the sexual blackmail operations that intelligence agencies have used involved underage boys. Epstein was known to only really, exploit underage girls. So presumably at the same time Epstein was involved in his activity, there was someone also doing the same to underage boys that we don't know about. So, I think until intelligence is held accountable, we'll never really know how many Epsteins are out there and how many kids they're exploiting and, taking from schools and homes and forcing them into this work. As long as it has state protection and an infinite source of financing through black budgets or taxpayer funds, this type of stuff will continue. So focusing all the attention just on Epstein specifically and Epstein's death and things of that nature prevents us from eradicating the problem.
So everybody wants Ghislaine Maxwell to be held accountable. You said that she's probably under the protection of intelligence agencies and she's in Israel. What do you base that on? Do you think she may have royal protection through this relationship with Prince Andrew?
I wouldn't rule it out. Of course, the royal family does have ties to the British intelligence apparatus. I definitely think that is possible. I say that about Israel because the most recent reports that have been about Ghislaine Maxwell's whereabouts have cited Israel specifically. There hasn't been a lot of media interest in trying to find out where she is or even take pictures of her, even though I'm sure, a paparazzi photographer would be handsomely paid for that, but there hasn't been any interest, apparently, in doing so. So that to me suggests some level of state protection. Knowing that her father had very close ties to Israel's intelligence apparatus would make sense. He also, worked as, an informant or asset or what have you for several different intelligence agencies around the world, because even though he is most closely linked to Israel's intelligence, he was very self-serving, and like a lot of people that get very deep in the world of organized crime and intelligence, sell out to the highest bidder on numerous occasions. So it's really hard to know exactly which agencies would be most interested in harboring Maxwell, but given what's come out about a lot of the sexual blackmail operation being tied to Israel and Ghislaine Maxwell's own family ties to Israel, Robert Maxwell is buried there after all in a cemetery that's reserved for very well-respected Israeli politicians and military figures. And he was basically given a state funeral and eulogized by top members of Israel's intelligence agencies and government. So, it would make a lot of sense for her to be there, but I definitely wouldn't rule out her being shuffled around different countries at any given time to intelligence-linked safe houses, of which there are numerous, throughout the world, really. And I would say that that state protection is why she hasn't been seen and probably why she won't be held accountable until those same intelligence agencies are forced to be accountable, which, as we've seen time and again, regardless of the scandal, the intelligence agency always ends up investigating itself and then acquitting itself, right? So the push for accountability then has to come from the people. And as I've said, a lot of people have lost interest in this case as time has gone on, which is, very unfortunate, but is, due to how mainstream media and the media landscape in general covers this story.
Well, they've not lost interest on my channel. There's an obsession with it. So I've just got one final question because we're nearly at the hour. Virginia made serious allegations against Jean-Luc Brunel. What became of him?
Well, so after Epstein was quote unquote killed, there were reports that Brunel and Maxwell were hiding out together. The first report of that claimed that it was some very exclusive resort in Brazil, but it's really hard to know if he is still there. We do know that Jean-Luc Brunel, during the time he was associated with Epstein and the blackmail operation specifically, would travel to South America on numerous occasions to try and procure girls for the operation from there. So, it wouldn't be that surprising for Brunel to be hiding out there, but honestly, even though there's still occasionally been sort of spurts of reporting on Ghislaine Maxwell and her whereabouts, Jean-Luc Brunel has not really gotten any of that waning media interest even, so it's really hard to know where he is. For a time, France was going to investigate the Epstein scandal, and there was some media attention about, finally, they'll get to the bottom of it because the U.S. didn't, or the U.K. didn't. But of course, that is quite naive when we consider that the current president of France used to work for the Rothschild banks, which are tied to a lot of this criminal syndicate for which I sort of uncover in my reports, and that a major member of the Rothschild family, Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, is the person that introduced Epstein to Bill Clinton, apparently, and made that connection. So they have a lot of interest in that not being investigated. So, I just... unfortunately, if people want accountability, either for Maxwell or Brunel, it has to come from pressure from the public, and it will not be coming from our public institutions or from mainstream media outlets, which is very unfortunate.
I think a lot of people will find what you've said today and your other articles online, the depth of the research is just absolutely jaw-dropping. People will want to support you. People will want to contact you. Do you have preferred means of people supporting you on social media or contacting you?
Right. So I am right now easiest to contact on Twitter, because I do have a Facebook author page, but I have been sort of banned from posting anything on it since last April. So you can see it, but there's no recent articles, and I can not really respond that easily to messages on there. But Twitter is usually a better bet. I do have a Patreon that I started up because even though I've been at Mint Press News for several years, I have plans in the very near future to be going independent. So if you would like to support my work, you can follow me on my Patreon, which I believe is Whitney Webb MPN on patreon.com, or you can just search my name and it will come up there. I have plans, I already have signed the paperwork. I will be turning my investigation on Epstein into a book, which I will be combining with a second investigative series that focus on the Epstein-Trump relationship, the real estate money laundering, and Epstein's other financial crimes, including his very major role in collapsing Bear Stearns in 2008 during the economic crisis, which unsurprisingly didn't get really any media coverage at all when the scandal broke last year. You think that would be quite significant, but it's very well documented that he basically was the pin that pricked Bear Stearns and led to its collapse during the last financial crisis, and other things of that nature. So I think that will be of interest to some of your viewers, and if they would like to help me support that series and the effort behind that book, because the publisher I'm working with is really small, so they really couldn't pay me in advance on the book. So I'm basically trying to crowdfund it. So if anyone would be interested in seeing my efforts in my research efforts into this, very sordid scandal and the world of intelligence and organized crime and sexual blackmail and all of that, if you would like to support me, please support me on Patreon.
So all of Whitney's links are in the description box below this video. So I urge people to click down and support what she's doing. Have you decided on a title for the book?
Yeah, it's One Nation Under Blackmail is the title.
Wow. So I thank you for coming on. Huge thank you to all the people who are following the Epstein videos on my channel. If you've not subscribed, subscription box is in the bottom right-hand corner of this video. Huge thank you to all the people who donated on PayPal, Patreon, Just Giving, Subscribe Star to make these videos possible. I totally look forward to reading more of your upcoming reports and finding out what you've got to say on this and the book as well. So thanks for being so generous with your time. Cheers.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.